With a clamor of bells that set the swallows soaring, the festival of summer came to the city, Omelas, bright towered by the sea. The rigging of boats in harbor sparkled with flags. In the streets between houses with red roofs and painted walls, between old moss gardens and avenues of trees, past great parks and public buildings, processions moved. Some were decorous, old people in long stiff robes of mauve and gray, grave master workmen, quiet, merry women carrying their babies and chatting as they walked. In other streets, the music beat faster, a shimmering of gong and tambourine, and the people went dancing. The procession was a dance. Children dodged in and out, their high calls rising like the swallows crossing flights over the music and the singing. Woo! The descriptions get more vivid and more blissful as we move on, guys. But don't fall in love with this utopia, my fellow readers. The story takes a rather dark turn in its few short pages that shocks, upsets, and lingers with the reader far after he or she has read it. That is, if you have any sort of conscience at all. Ursula K. Le Guin's short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, is a haunting, poignant, piercing message, and it introduces big ideas like those of classical Greek literature. Is the greater good of many worth the abject suffering of a few? If you knew that you had to subjugate and cause the lifelong misery and isolation of another person in order for you and all the people that you know and love to prosper and live in harmony, would you be willing to partake in that arrangement? Could you live with yourself? A utopian city, clean with joyous people who walk the streets free of crime, suffering, and much that ails society as we know it, Omelas promises to be that shining city on the hill. Indeed, Ursula K. Le Guin paints such an alluring, mesmerizing utopia. All I can say is, like Liz Lemon, aka Tina Fey, I want to go to there. But in one short paragraph, things take a very, very dark turn. You see, the existence of this utopia is predicated on two things. Number one, the misery of one of its citizens, and that citizen just happens to be a child. Number two, the knowledge of all the other citizens that this child is basically being neglected and tortured. It is kept in a dark, dingy room, showed no love, and is not spoken to. If it speaks, and occasionally it does, it receives no response. It lives in its own excrement. And I assume the fact that the room has no window and no natural light coming in might actually be a small mercy for this poor child, because if you were to look outside, or she were to look outside and see this paradise outside the window, it might actually be even worse. The depiction is so cruel, I almost skipped this part of reading it, but her writing is so compelling, of course I was going to read it. Here's an excerpt from that passage. The people at the door never say anything, but the child, who has not always lived in the tool room and can remember sunlight and its mother's voice, sometimes speaks. I will be good, it says. Please let me out. I will be good. They never answer. The child used to scream for help at night and cry a good deal, but now it only makes a kind of whining. And it speaks less and less often. Sorry, that's so disturbing to me that it's really hard for me to read stuff like that. It just, I'm not sure what it is about this story, but it really gets to me. It's that moment that I think most young idealistic minds, most college freshmen made to read this story who didn't just go out and get the Cliff Notes, probably think that a society that we see of this nature is one in which we would never actually partake in. But think about it. You know, we're wearing clothes made by garment workers who wear their fingers down to make the fast fashion that we put on our backs. Never mind the phones that we hold in our hands were fashioned by workers who sometimes commit suicide to escape the harsh conditions that they work in. I don't think the themes introduced in this story are merely those of an intellectual, waxing philosophical or political. Le Guin did write this book in 1973, and the effects of slavery and segregation were and are pervasive in American society. The birth of the American middle class, its sprawling suburbs, and the wealth it has accumulated was not felt by all, and it certainly wasn't felt by the formerly enslaved populations. I once heard a great analogy for slavery, by the way. You're playing a game of Monopoly, right? And only 3 of the pieces are allowed to play for the first several rounds. Then the final 4th player is allowed to roll the dice, but, he just keeps landing on someone else's property. Most of the land has been bought up. He's left with no choice but to deplete his resources paying rent. To him, the game that he's playing is not one in which he can partake of its spoils. To me, the citizens of Omelas are different, though, from the citizens of modern society. You see, few of my friends growing up, and few of my colleagues growing up, thought anything about garment workers. Hell, unless they were black, few of them thought about racism or slavery, and they never really thought about what it takes to get the products on their wrists, right? What it takes to get the products in their pockets or on their backs. The citizens of Omelas, however, are all aware of the sacrifice needed to sustain their lifestyles. Perhaps they are an allegory of the Harvard-educated class that Guin herself was privy to. Perhaps it was a rebuke of the political class that understood this, though, judging from the politicians of today, the ones of 1973 may have been more informed, making their approval of the status quo at that time more incriminating. I don't know. Who knows? But what I do know is that its citizens of Omelas are, number one, educated, and number two, they know their status is predicated upon this system. And some of them are not okay with this. For example, some teenagers who glance upon the child do not go home and cry. They don't whimper like the other teenagers do. Instead, they gather their things and they leave. They leave the city of Omelas. The depictions in this short story are so vivid, I'm not going to spoil it here, and will just ask you to go ahead and read that part of the story yourself, or read the entire story yourself. It's really well worth the few short pages that you have to invest in reading it. But why do they just walk away? Is this a selfish act? Or is it indeed the only thing they can do? After all, they may reject the system that is set up, but this doesn't mean that they don't think the system actually works. In other words, if they were to say, break into the room, free the child, they may face several dilemmas. Number one, the child is beyond repair at this point. It has been so emaciated that it has the body of a 6-year-old, yet they believe that it is actually 10 years of age at this point. Its mind is so damaged that it can't really enjoy the society for which it has become a victim of. From the point of view of those who walk away, breaking the system instead of walking away means that their friends, their loved ones, and society as a whole would suffer and crumble. So perhaps this was the only thing that they could do. Yes, they may think the system works, and they may understand the machinations of it, but their conscience simply won't allow them to be part of it. There are no easy answers in this story, but it is a compelling story nonetheless, and I really think and recommend that you should read it and come up with your own conclusions. Even though this is not really a book review, I'm going to go ahead and give it a review. I do love the story a lot, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a lot of praise here. For readability, I'm going to give it a full moon. For pacing, I'm going to give it a full moon. It's a short story, so of course it's paced beautifully. For interest, I'm going to give it a full moon. I really was hooked on this, even though I was assigned this in my college freshman year. I loved the story. And overall, I'm going to give it a full moon. Okay, thank you very much. If you liked what you saw and what you heard, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm trying to get this channel started. I don't know what I'm doing, but I do appreciate any help that you can give me. Thank you. Bye.